A writer only begins a book. A reader finishes it. Samuel Johnson.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. And welcome to September.
I am very excited to start this month where we're going to be talking about the elements of your book that have nothing to do with the writing. I mean, okay, it has stuff to do with the writing, but it's about paragraphing, the rhythm, how to format your book in ways that works for your reader. And we wanted to kick that off by talking about the reader experience to give you a look at why all of these things that we're going to talk about this month are important.
I feel like a lot of people want to focus on the words themselves. How do I pick the most descriptive word and the best word for this? And how do I avoid adverbs and all of that sort of thing? But a lot of the subtlety and the fun parts of the craft come with the way that the book is visually read. That white space is an intentional tool in your toolbox that you can learn to wield with expertise that completely changes the reader experience.
In our bonus episode last month, we talked about instinct. How instinct really drives and can help you craft your book without really having to get into the nitty-gritty of plot, of structure, anything like that. And this month is going to help you wield that same instinct in your reader's advantage. I think especially when it comes to things like your dialogue versus action tags or your choice for when to paragraph can convey things to your readers that you didn't necessarily mean to convey. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong any more than a hammer is wrong. It's a tool, but if you have a screw, a hammer's not going to do the right job. So you need to know when to apply what.
I feel like if you can wield assumptions to your advantage, you can have much leaner writing, much faster writing, a much more enjoyable writing, at least for my particular genre and audience that I work for. I had a member of the writing club read a sample of my work, and they mentioned they assumed that a particular character, because of the way she talked and the way the point of view character talked about her, that she looked a certain way. And they wanted me to write it down. They wanted me to physically describe this character with something that they can already assume and understand. She dies in 2 pages. The character is not worth investing that kind of time into. So that's advice I'm not going to take. But I found it interesting that she had a very clear image of the character already, and she wanted to be told the information that she already had. If you can convey that information in other, more interesting ways, those kinds of things will make the reader feel like they're participating in the story, like our quote said.
When it comes to inside the book itself, we want to take a look at the pacing, the rhythm. Like we talked about last month, where something is in your book will determine how the reader interprets it. It will communicate a lot of different things to the reader about its importance level. You have a character introduced in the middle of Act 2, and it's not likely going to be that important. There are some things that need to be conveyed or happen earlier for it to feel necessary for the reader.
For instance, if you are writing a murder mystery, and at the end of Act 2 you introduce the murderer, it feels like a cop-out. We don't really recognize that, but it feels like you're leading us around by the nose until we actually get to the important information. But if the murderer is actually somebody that we met in the first act, then okay, it was this person all along. Therefore, we can feel excited about knowing who the murderer is instead of annoyed because it feels like this deus ex machina at the very end.
I once read a book where the pacing was completely wrong in this same sense, and it made me have a book that I really enjoyed not want to pick up the sequel. Totally ruined my experience because the pacing wasn't what it should have been in most novel formats, and it wasn't what I was expecting. So that's one thing you have to take into account when it comes to the reader experience, is their expectations really can play a hand in how well they like or don't like your book.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a letdown if you're expecting things to go awry and the last third of the book is just the happily ever after. Something to keep in mind as you're putting your novel together is your first 5 named characters are assumed by your readers to be important. The unnamed characters, the clerk, the barista, whatever, those characters aren't going to be interesting. So if you're starting with a murder mystery, make sure only the murdered victim, who then sets off the chain of events for the rest of the story, make sure only that person is named.
Another thing that you need to understand about the reader experience is how they are going to be consuming your book. The 3 major formats are audiobook, paperback, or hardback, or ebook. That can either be Kindle or online, just depending on how they like to read it. Each of these will determine a lot of the things in your process for what sort of formatting, what sort of effort you need to take in how the book looks.
In audiobook, it's a very different experience because not only do we not have that white space that we can lean on to make something feel fast-paced in a written novel, but it's also very relentless. As a listener/reader, if you get distracted for a moment, you might miss something. In visual formats, that's just less likely to happen because then you'll just pick up where your eyes cross and you can keep going. So understanding that your audience is more likely to miss things and more likely to appreciate when you are connecting dots for them in an audiobook versus a paperback version is something to consider.
You also don't have a lot of opportunity to play with white space and paragraphing to convey speed and tone and pace, but your audiobook narrator should be familiar with that and use all of that visual part that you put into it and maybe a little bit of stage direction to help them convey the same ideas just through their voice and the pacing there.
Paperback, believe it or not, has some pros and cons as well. It's not just all pros. I know a lot of people really appreciate and have paperback as their favorite. But there are some other things that you might consider as you're putting your book together for this particular audience. Some of the cons are that it's difficult to get comfortable when you're reading. I read a lot in the bed, so I'm flopping around in the bed as I'm doing it. And so it's easy for me to lose track and to reread or accidentally read ahead. So understanding what's at the end of a paragraph, what's at the beginning of a paragraph, those are the things that are going to catch my eye until I figure out where I was again.
I think one of the benefits of having the hardcover is that it's more difficult to get distracted. It's easier to get sucked into it because it's not on a phone where you're going to decide to open up Facebook or TikTok or whatever, and you're not multitasking while you're listening to it like you would with an audiobook. It's a lot easier to get invested and really get hooked on that hard copy book. But again, it's not as convenient as audiobooks or ebooks are in most cases.
I will also point out that you know when you're getting to the end of the book because of how thin it is, not just with the pacing. The page looks pretty much the same for digital. You can build anticipation by getting closer and closer to the end because that right hand is getting thinner and thinner and the left hand is getting thicker and thicker. So there is an instinct for overall percentages in your reader of, yep, we're getting close to the end now.
And your readers instinctively know pacing. They instinctively know that, oh, I'm this far, something exciting should happen soon. And that does carry over into Kindle a little bit, the ebook format, where you have the ability to track percentages. Unless you have like an omnibus sort of system. I had that once where I bought like an entire set and I had no idea when the end of book 1 was coming because it was like still 8% into the whole set. And it drove me nuts because I just kept waiting for the book to end and it wasn't, and I hated it. And it kept going way past where it should have.
Some of the other cons of an online or a Kindle book would be it's important to keep track of where you are in the story. My audiobook playback program saves where I left off. It's easy to slide a bookmark in, but especially if you're looking at like an online blog where there's a chapter released every week kind of thing, you have to like navigate and avoid spoilers and build that navigation so you have a lot more chapter titles and these kinds of things. in order to help keep track of the world and the book as a whole.
Now, if you're using an ebook reader, that isn't necessarily the case. It does save where you are when you closed out the Kindle or the Kobo or whatever it is. But it's also a lot harder to look at the map because it may not be nicely hot linked and you have to like dig through it a little bit. And if you want to go back a few pages, it's just annoying in a lot of cases, especially if your Kindle, like mine, starts to slow down.
There are, of course, some pros of having a digital format, and one of which is your audience always has the opportunity to read the book. It's very rare that they're going, I wish I could read the book, but I can't. So having a book with you everywhere, if that's the type of audience you're leaning for, the Kindle and online might be great for that.
It's also really good for offering a certain level of discreetness when it comes to the kinds of books that you're reading. I will never understand this, but there are a lot of people who just like reading their spicy books wherever they are, whether it's in a doctor's office or waiting for a train. The ebook allows them that level of discretion that otherwise would not be offered with a steamy orc on the front cover. Overall, the reader experience will play into how you go about the rest of the topics that we're going to cover this month. It will determine how much effort you put into things like formatting and white space. Not as important if you're doing something like Kindle. But all of this doesn't matter unless you've written something. So, as you listen through the month, just remember to
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.